guys. Welcome back to the Left of Str8 Show Interviews, the premier podcast that shares the stories of our amazing LGBTQ community and, of course, fantastic straight allies, all from entertainment, foodies, books, music, and advocacy. I'm your host, as always, Scott Fullerton, and let's start talking. Well, hello, friends. I'm thrilled to have with me the New York Times best-selling author, Eliot Schrefer, here, a standout voice in young adult literatures in studio with me. Eliot has twice been named a finalist for the National Book Award in Young People's Literature and has earned numerous accolades, including a Prince Honor, a Stonewall Honor, and the Green Earth Book Award. Eliot's work is celebrated for its profound depth and emotional resonance, tackling themes of identity, survival, and connection. His latest book, The Brightness Between Us, is a sequel to the vastly popular The Darkness Outside of Us, and it's a continuation of his thought-provoking explorations of space, love, and what it means to be human in a vast and sometimes isolating universe. I'm looking forward to diving into Eliot's journey as a writer and discuss his inspirations, experiences, and the powerful stories he continues to tell. But first, take a look.
Welcome to the show, Eliot.
I am so happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you. This is one of the most fun books I have ever read about science, about nature, about animals, about the human condition. Let's jump straight into it. Queer ducks and other animals. This seems like a joke. And the book is very funny, which is great, but you're learning about a side of the animal kingdom that many people haven't talked about. So let's start with the why. Why did you decide to write a book about queer ducks and other animals?
Yeah, fair enough. I was surprised by the topic too. I come from a background of studying evolution, and I'd always assumed that queer behavior was a sort of dead end for animals.
Yes.
That behaviors that wouldn't cause their genes to propagate into the next generation wouldn't spread. And yet, Nature did a study 3 years ago that put the number at 1,500 species and counting that have significant peer-researched same-sex sexual behavior in the wild. And so the question that was on my mind was why, right? Why is this happening? And the basic version of the story is that we got the story of animal sex wrong, that we think of it as procreation only.
Yes.
Humans, we have a wide variety of reasons for having sex, but animals just dutifully walk up to Noah's Ark in their male-female pairs, and they have sex only to have offspring, and then that's the end of the story. When there's actually a wide range of animals with different reasons for having same-sex sexual behaviors.
Well, Eliot Schrefer, welcome to the Left of Str8 Show, my friend. How are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Congratulations. It's Happy Book Day for you. This fantastic new book is coming out today. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny, book people, we don't have the same grand events that movie people do. There's not going to be any talk and turn on the red carpet today. So it's nice to be able to talk to you to commemorate the launch day.
Well, thank you. But you get to do them at Barnes & Noble's has a great coffee shop, and I'm all about the coffee, so that's okay.
Yeah, and it's much calmer. No one recognizes you on the street. You're safe to go about your day. You do have to dress up.
Yeah. I love that. Well, welcome to the show. I always like to start with first two questions for first-timers here. So let's start by telling me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up, and what kind of a kid were you?
Yeah, I'm sort of I call myself a domestic short hair. I grew up all over the country. We moved all the time when I was growing up. So I don't really have any regional roots, except that I was in Clearwater, Florida for middle school and high school. So that's probably my origin story. But those who are catching the video of our podcast will see I'm a pale, bookish person, and Florida wasn't a great match for me. So I got out of there as soon as I could. And I now live in New York City. And I've been writing young adult books for about 15 years. I started by writing for adults and then switched over. And it was, something I never really turned back. It made me a better writer, I think, because writing for teens forced me to consider my audience more than when I was writing for adults, where I was kind of writing for myself and my friends and not really thinking about the reader's experience as much. But when you're writing for a 17-year-old who has this sense of urgency around what do I do as an LGBT person, or how do I manage relationships, and just wanting to have this experience through a book of feeling seen and understood. I think it kind of changed the whole project of writing for me and made it sort of more about other people instead of myself. And I also made me kind of happier in my own skin as well. So my writing journey is like sort of like slowly just become younger and younger people that I'm writing for. So I have a picture book coming out next year, and I have some like chapter books for early readers. But I've really found my temperament and my voice is best match for young adult. So Darkness Outside Us is technically a young adult novel, even though the majority of its readers have been adults so far.
That is amazing. And I always thought, I mean, you talk about these great characters in your book, very open and lovingly LGBTQ, and you're married to a wonderful husband. Talk about your own coming out journey. When did you kind of start coming out to yourself, and where do you feel you started to find your own LGBTQ tribe?
Yeah. So I was one of those people that it was not like a smooth transition to realizing I was gay. It was like puberty hit and it was clear. Like it was it was almost like a plot twist in my own life. You know, one day I
Right.
did not have desire for other guys, and then I did. And I was in sixth grade when this happened. And I was also like the smallest kid in the class. Like anyone would have thought of as already having hit puberty, but my voice just dropped. And this is 1991 in Clearwater. And at that point, you know, it was kind of the last time I think that talking about LGBT people was as high an anxiety point countrywide as it is now. You know, this was the era of Ellen DeGeneres coming out on her show, and then the show getting canceled. RuPaul had their drag show, their talk show, and it was like a big flashpoint. And just like the conversation in my middle school was that, you know, gay people were terrible. Like this was a sort of purple area. And, you know, people just cheerfully say in the cafeteria, like, they should all be sent to some island to die. And this was like who I was. And it was a real shock to me. And so I just went to the library and looked up homosexuality in the encyclopedia and tried to find information about who I was and why I was. And at this point, there wasn't a lot of books. I can't really think of any that I read that had LGBT characters in that were written for younger people. And so I think, you know, as I become a writer, I often think about that young self that needed to feel seen, even though I didn't feel safe speaking about my desires and who I was for a number of years. It would have been amazing to have read something that was tailored for me. Because what I did read was I went to the public library and just like grabbed books off the shelf, but they were, you know, Michael Cunningham novels and Paul Manette and a lot of,
Right.
you know, especially at that point, there was a big surge of novels about the devastation of the AIDS crisis. And so it was important and educational, but also as an 11-year-old, it was thrown into the deep end where I could have used some books that existed still in the shallow end. So I think of that now as a writer as well.
Well, I mean, you talk about you've written so many different kinds of books. We're going to talk about the different stories you've written about in a little bit, but I mean, you have a great process for developing these characters that really seem to resonate really deeply, especially with our LGBTQ audience. So that's really a gift, my friend. So, do you have any are these characters based on people you've gone through your growing up, or how do you kind of create? What's your process for creating a character?
Yeah, I feel like writers tend to be in two different camps. One where the character comes first, and so you start imagining this person, and then you find a story for them to follow along in order to investigate that character. I'm the other kind where the story comes first, and then I think about who are the characters who will be most affected by this story, or who would feel it the most deeply. And so the Darkness Outside Us is about two boys who are apparently sent on a rescue mission to rescue an astronaut who's stranded on Titan, one of the moons of Saturn. This is 400 years in the future. And so they're from warring countries and they're stuck in the same spaceship. And they are initially devout enemies of each other, but learn that they have to collaborate in order to survive the mysteries of their voyage. And so when I was creating them, I was thinking about ways to explore this. I don't like the phrase characters who just happen to be LGBT because I think it's foundational to who they are. But it is very much a sci-fi plot first, and then also this romance happening behind it. So I was thinking about like, how could I characterize these two boys where it would be the most tense romance? And this is my first book with a romance in it. And I talked to a few romance writers and I was like, how does it work? Tell me everything. And they said, you know, like one of the key things is as your premise, just have as many barriers as you can between the two people. And so I have them coming from these countries at war, sworn enemies, and also like two very different countries. So Ambrose, the protagonist, is from what I would consider sort of like the Athens of the future. It's very like full of poetry and queer theory, and it's very inclusive and progressive. And Kodiak, the other young man on the ship, is from a much more rigid, kind of patriarchal culture where they're taught to suppress their emotions and not express them. And it's a way of exploring who we bring of ourselves, what we bring of ourselves to our relationships. And I think that was a big lesson I had to learn in my 20s. I'm pieces of Ambrose and pieces of Kodiak because that hangover of my early upbringing still made me want to wall off feeling vulnerable or scared or like all those feelings that I had to pretend not to have. It took a long time for me to figure out how to find those, to take off some of the armor and find the real self inside of me in order to be a good friend, a good partner. And so I think the book is a way of exploring how do you be with another person, and not to give away the book's plot twist, but they have chances to kind of restart this relationship in a substantial way. And I often thought about, the sort of the wasteland of all my bad boyfriending in my 20s and like none of that, like there's no going back, like the scar tissue is there. But I think about, some of those people that I dated it might have worked out if I had been more equipped to be really vulnerable and intimate with someone. So I think it's something, the spaceship is a perfect place to explore that kind of thing because they are really the only game in town. So there's no one else on this ship. It's just the two of them. So it's about kind of learning to love the one you're with. And that is ultimately, I think, the story of all love stories, that this kind of love at first sight and it's permanent and perfect is kind of a myth that we sell to people. And I think it's very much about daily choices around this intimacy that you're trying to build.
That's great insight. Because I was wondering, I mean, there's a lot of choices to make on a book like this, and this is a pretty harsh reality for it. So I love that you kind of got this advice to put these obstacles in there because there's definitely some obstacles there, but it's kind of helps build the tension for it and everything. Did you ever think you were going to base a story in outer space? I mean, that's kind of a little bit of departure from where you started out.
It is. Yeah. What happened to me was I'm not sure when this movie came out, back late 90s, I saw What Lies Beneath, this somewhat forgettable romantic thriller with Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer. And I was watching it and I hatched this theory for the first half that I decided Michelle Pfeiffer there's actually 10 of her and she doesn't realize that she's cloned. It was the only way I could make the story make sense because it wasn't holding together in my mind. And that wasn't actually the twist that was in that movie. But it lived in my mind of like this idea of, what if there are more versions of you out there? And so that stuck in my mind. And then I thought about like, what's the best place to explore that kind of thing? And this idea of a futuristic society in a spaceship really appealed to me. And I feel like all books should be thrillers in some way, even if they're not officially thrillers. Like they should be thrilling, right? It should be a thrilling experience to read a book. Right. And one of the key things about thrillers is the closed space that you can't get out. Like think of The Shining and this snowed in hotel and no one can leave. The spaceship is the ultimate closed set because if you want to leave, you're in the vacuum of space, so you're dead. So you are really stuck there. And like, what better place for escalating tension than being on a spaceship? And also, science is equally an important part of my life as writing. Yeah. I just got a master's in animal studies, and I'm, just very much interested in how the world works in a kind of literal way, as well as the emotional way that I explore through novels. So it was a perfect way to combine them, was writing a sci-fi novel.
I bet. Yeah, it sounds fantastic. Now, talk about, you spoke of movies here. Eliot Page's production company, Pageboy Productions, kind of optioned this first book, The Darkest Tree. Talk about that. I just saw Close to You, their movie. Eliot is fantastic in this. So talk about how this meeting came about and what kind of drew him to your story.
Yeah, Eliot Page is onto like really wonderful things. So Pageboy Productions, his production company, is really interested in looking at commercial, grabby, high concept movies that also include substantially marginalized voices that you don't find kind of necessarily outside of more art house and independent movies. And so in that way, I think it was kind of the idea of a gay sci-fi story was kind of a natural fit for them at the company. And so we had some initial meetings about it, and they were all in. And I can't give details, but a major studio has come around behind the movie and is funding it in a major way. So, there's with film, there's 1,000 ways that projects can fall through, but all the signs look good. So I'm feeling very excited about the idea of an adaptation. I wouldn't want to. I feel like as a writer, I've said my piece. They have 400 pages of everything I think about these characters in this story, and I am excited to be to help and to give review scripts and help them imagine the story. But I'm very much excited about the idea of sitting down in a dark movie theater, the lights go up, and I don't know what to expect. Like what a cool treat. Like I don't want to put my hands all over the thing and then lose that opportunity to sort of get to see like someone else's take. And I hope they alter things and change it and make it well suited to the screen instead of just being a novel. So it's
definitely an exciting journey to be on, my friend. Congratulations. That's amazing to hear. Now let's talk about The Brightness Between Us. It's a sequel to Darkness Outside of Us. How do you approach the challenge of continuing such a kind of complex and emotionally charged story? I mean, did you have an inspiration when you were doing the first book? Does it expand the themes? Talk about how this second book came to you.
Yeah, I have. I'm a little leery about sequels in general because for every great sequel, there's probably 4 or 5 either mediocre or terrible sequels. I've actually almost gotten in fights now for saying that Grease 2 is a terrible sequel because some people are really, really big fans, but I did not enjoy that one. We're keeping up the Michelle Pfeiffer theme here, actually.
There you go. I like that.
But I also, or Speed 2, or it's just you're sort of like. It feels like a rehash. Whereas for me, the ideal of a sequel is something more like what Alien became when it turned to Aliens, which was very much about still Sigourney Weaver. It was about this alien attacking people, but it turned from this kind of slasher movie in space for the first one into this war movie in space for the second one. It felt kind of fundamentally different. And for me, I didn't want to write like a day 2 sequel where the story just kept on going and it felt like the next chapter was the beginning of the next book. I also didn't want to leave on an utter cliffhanger because I get furious at authors when it's like 3 years until you can resolve this cliffhanger for when the next book comes out. That seems, since I get mad, I didn't want to make readers mad. So I kind of stalled on writing a sequel until I had an idea that felt like a substantial movement. This could be the same, but very different at the same time. And so as the model for The Brightness Between Us, I love, there was a big way in which 19th century novels wrote in this cliffhanger form where you'd have 2 storylines and you'd follow one and then it would come to like an utter crucial moment. Like finally the young woman has to choose between her 2 suitors, and then the next page is another storyline. So you don't resolve it right away. You go to another storyline that reaches another cliffhanger, and then you're like, oh no, I have to figure this out. And then you go back and resolve that first cliffhanger, and then it weaves together. And it's like that whole shelf of Anthony Trollope novels in Barnes and Noble that few people actually take down and read. Like they all operate that way. And I loved it. And it felt like a way to be really substantially different. So there's 2 timelines in the sequel and 4 different viewpoint characters, whereas the first one just had one timeline and one point of view character. And this kind of surprising interweaving of two seemingly unrelated storylines was something I was really excited to try. And it felt like it would be like people could spend more time in this world, get to know their characters even more, but also not feel like they were reading a rehash or just the sort of second volume of one story.
Well, and still at its heart, it's like it's a story of human survival cloaked in just another epic love story. So I love that altogether. What do you want to say about the human capacity to love and the role of intimacy in relationships? Because it's very prevalent in this book.
Yeah, it's funny. I know they always say don't read your reviews, but I actually kind of love to. It's like the best focus group you could imagine. So I read the Goodreads reviews for Darkness Outside Us. And there was one line came out time and again. And I didn't expect it to. It just came out in the draft, but a lot of people like seized on this one line, which was intimacy is the only shield against insanity. That the only way to keep, we think humans can be self-sufficient, but we can't. That we need connection in order to stay regulated and to actually be a functioning, healthy human being. And I think, especially in sci-fi and in space, we have this conception that, you know, the astronauts should be like the Air Force pilot model, right? Like no needs, like these instruments that are going off into space, when actually like humans just can't exist that way. It's just not true. And I think, you know, what do you do when you're up against huge odds, when things can seem hopeless and you don't know what way forward? Like, how do you find the way forward? I think the answer is all about connection and friendship and family and romantic intimacy. Like whatever that human connection is always a solution in some way to intense struggle. And I think, you know, initially it seems like love and space are actually not good combinations, because you like think about sci-fi and the history of sci-fi, you have a lot of very kind of sexless sci-fi, like 2001. You know, it's about the tension and about science, but it's not about romantic relationships or intense human connection. And I think it's actually the kind of perfect forum to look at love, because, you know, Carl Sagan has this amazing essay called Tiny Blue Dot, where he talks about that first time we saw Earth from the outside after the moon landing, and that you could see how vulnerable it was. And you realize, he said, you know, we realize that all these things that matter so much or seem to matter so much, kings and queens and falling countries and war and pandemics, seem so much smaller when you look at Earth from the outside. And I think, you know, like how do you, if it's all kind of like just we're on the third rock going around this sun, you know, what meaning does anything have? I think we find our meaning in our connection to other people. And so I think that's why a love story as a match for a space environment seemed like a very, very natural one to me.
Well said. And you mentioned 2001. I mean, the artificial intelligence plays kind of a big part in the drama of the first novel. Does The Brightness Between Us take a more critical view of AI? I mean, now we're in theater business and film business now, and it's been talked about a lot in writing and in cinema and everything now. Do you have a little more critical view of it, or where does that part take place here in the new book?
Yeah, great question. I think, you know, for me in the first book, I love the function of HAL in 2001 and this adversary that is all powerful, and they're on a ship that's run by this operating system and it knows everything. There's no having a conversation it can't hear. It actually even uses the sound of their pulse to determine if they're in a heightened emotional state. The ship can kind of sense if they are secretly collaborating or lying. And so it was this kind of monolithic adversary in the first book. But ultimately, the boys wind up, you know, the future of humanity. Earth is destroyed. They're settling a new planet on the edge of the galaxy, and the AI is still there. And now its true mission is revealed, which is to be the kind of helpful cultivator of their lives. And I think for us now, there's no avoiding or getting rid of the question of AI. There's no kind of making rules to keep it out of our lives. It's the Pandora's box is open, and so I think the question is how to make it so that it is useful and helpful and a force of positive good. And I think, you know, Hal kind of set the field and the expectation for science fiction that if you have an artificial intelligence, it's going to be the enemy. And I kind of enjoyed taking an enemy and having it be an enemy for a while, and then turning it into an ally. And I think it's one way of thinking about our relationship to tech.
Nice. I like that. And you've garnered a Stonewall Award for your work amongst many other awards. Talk about that LGBTQ representation. What does that mean to kind of have that kind of feeling from the rest of your peers and everything? It's got to be a good feeling, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's especially writing for teenagers, and right now, it's very much on the forefront of people's minds. Last week was Banned Book Week, and we do see this incredible surge in challenges and bans around LGBTQ literature for young people these days. And so, you know, often people ask, do you do you feel like you need to like sort of start censoring your own work in order to stay published and to move copies out there? And it feels like very much the opposite. There is such a kind of ludicrous overreach in what is being removed and censored. I mean, one of the books that's in the top 10 banned books is In Tango Makes Three, this beautiful picture book about two male penguin dads raising a chick in the Central Park Zoo based on the true story. And there's certainly no sex in that book. There's not the word sex or the word gay. It's just about two doting parents who happen to be male raising this chick. And kids love that book. It has, moved so many copies and changed so many lives because they love seeing these parents of like a little cute little penguin, and they want parents like that too. I mean, they wanted the chick so much that they were like brooding an egg. They were sitting on top of an egg. Anyway, that when that is challenged and removed, it is under claims of pornography. And basically, what they are saying is LGBTQ identities themselves are inherently pornographic. That even speaking about gay representation is immoral for children. And this sort of accusation of pornography is a smokescreen used against that book. So when that is true, I think it's not like if I just hold back a sex scene from one of these books that now it won't be challenged. Like it's such a ludicrous overreach that there is no appeasing it. So for me, it just makes me want to speak louder, keep publishing more books with even more visible representation, and just so that young people have these messages and these stories to follow, especially, as a crisis of depression and anxiety among LGBT youth. And one of the things that, is the most, that will save people from that level of unhappiness is this feeling of being seen and recognized and valued for who they are. And sometimes we get that in our immediate surroundings. We get it from our family and our friends. And sometimes, you're dealt a different hand and you don't have that as a young person. And a book can provide that and give them a sense of acceptance, and that there is a reality out there where they are valued and loved. And it seems very important to keep as many of those stories in as many young people's hands as possible.
Well said. That's why we need you and all these great queer authors out there to continue this fantastic work. So well done. Now, we talk a little bit in addition about your different books you've done. In addition to young adult fiction, you've written nonfiction, such as that fun Queer Ducks and Other Animals. I love that. Talk about world building for books like these two we're talking about now versus world observing, like talking about the animal kingdom. What's fun for you? I mean, do you enjoy both equally, or talk about the difference between the two?
Yeah, I loved getting into the science behind Queer Ducks and Other Animals. That is a book. It's about this explosion of research in the last 20 years into same-sex sexual behavior in animals, which I grew up thinking that was an aberration or a non-starter, that it was not prevalent in the animal kingdom. And yet we find there's 1,500 different animal species and counting, with substantially confirmed field research showing that they have significant same-sex sexual behavior in the wild. And that just blew my mind. And so I did a deep dive for a year into animal sexual behavior and just really examined the research. And I thought I was going to have to kind of dig to find it. And instead, the immediate problem was how do I find, out of all these, I was printing out these studies and it was just a huge stack. And how do I find just the few that, will tell an interesting story for readers, and then I can gesture to the rest of the research out there. So that was actually really gave me hope, because it's the science is showing so much in that area. And so that was kind of that already existed, that was out there. I just had to tell the story the scientists' data was showing. And so it was kind of like starting with a block of marble and trying to winnow out the shapely book out of it. And it's very different with a novel, because starting from zero, like this blank document, and just having to imagine out the story that's there. And so it's very different processes. And I find myself now, I'm just beginning the research for a new nonfiction book. And so I find myself alternating, because they're two different ways of working that I think one is sort of like a break from the other. So I can work on nonfiction for a little while to just give myself a break from writing these novels.
I like that. Well, we played a little snippet of it in the intro there, but I recommend you guys go see Eliot's interview with Trevor Noah. I love it. He did a great great job of facilitating it. I think you guys handle the subject well. It's such a great story. So I encourage everyone to watch that one. Talk about, I mean, how do your books deal with a lot of intense survival, identity, love, like we've talked about. How do you balance these weighty topics and still make it accessible for younger viewers, younger readers like that? Have you ever found that as a challenge, or I think a lot of people take young readers for granted about about how quick they can really pick up on things. How do
Yeah.
you feel writing these kind of stories?
Yeah. I think, Darkness Outside certainly goes to the depths of the scariness of space, and there's plenty of mayhem that happens. Like, I don't hold any punches in that book, and I think back to, this is a book written not for kids but for people in their late teens and for adults. So I imagine 17-year-old me, and the only difference between 17-year-old me and adult me was that all these crazy, intense emotions like first love I was having them for the first time. So they were even bigger and rawer and juicier than when I was an adult. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember this infatuation feeling. Like, it's going to be followed by this other feeling that I now can expect. Whereas when you're a teenager, you're like, what is happening inside my mind? Like, you have one great conversation, you're like, we're going to get married. And so I think it's writing for YA is not about limiting what can be said or talked about, but sort of reaccessing that kind of higher octane experience of the world where things were just more intense and the volume was higher. And so it's just a way to explore that. And I think one of the things I love about young adult literature is that there really is such a breadth of storytelling. You find sort of cutesy romances, you find really kind of wholesome animal stories, and you can have intense space thrillers with a gay romance. Like, it is a really healthy big part of publishing, and there's a hunger for a real variety of stories. And so I've really enjoyed writing for that age group.
That's amazing. Can you tell me about any interaction you've had maybe with a young adult reader that you've kind of come across, and what kind of feedback you've gotten that's really kind of lifted your heart a bit?
Yeah, there's a lot of people will post on Instagram or TikTok their copies of the book, and you can see these 15-year-olds that already have like a bunch of schoolwork to do are then like, there's like little like post-it notes all like color coded all along the seams of this novel that they're reading for fun, because they want to like track themes or mark the scenes that they especially liked. And that this common impression we have of young people as kind of dead in the eyes and glued to their phones, and sort of like that they don't have good work ethics or whatever is sort of disproven by a lot of these fervent young readers, who especially love turning to printed material, and just really getting in deep. But it's a book where, for whatever reason, it's kind of broken through in the consciousness, and I get like probably like 2 or 3 emails a day from young readers who are just wanted to reach out and tell me that they have a new favorite book, and they feel seen in it, and it's like just that it was like a great moment for them. And slowly, I think a lot of adult sci-fi readers are coming around to the book, because I think there's an assumption that like YA story is going to be like overly simple and not interesting to me as an adult. And I think we've now I do hear from some adult sci-fi readers who are like, this is my first YA novel in a long time or ever. And but I enjoyed it. So it's good to see people crossing the line and like of genre and like and reading outside of what they normally would do. And I'm happy to provide the opportunity. Of course, I also get some angry messages that say I'm a groomer and like just ruining kids, and
Right.
that's going to come with the train. So
there you go. No, just keep it up, my friend. And like I said, I think and Harry Potter was a good gateway for that, I think, to bring the adult readers back into it. So I kind of started bringing you consider that maybe young adult to begin with too, but it really kind of gets imagination. Your books really bring that imagination as well. So I found it, if I got my copy, I'm going to go ahead and get the first one, so I can I want to read them kind of in order. But I'm so excited for you. Any advice you have before I let you go here for up and coming aspiring writers, maybe that might feel marginalized in communities and want to share their voices?
Yeah, I think you could never go wrong writing the story that you would dream of having access to that you can't find. So some aspect of your identity that's not currently represented, or just what you dream up and what you want to write about. And I think often young writers often think instead, what are 5 books that are out there and how can I make some sort of melange of them and write that? But what we really need is, new stories told in new ways. And when you can really pull one off, it will stand out and get people to notice. And the other piece of writing advice I would give for writers in the audience is just to, one thing I had to learn, and took me a while, was that there are 2 parts of being a writer. There's the creator part, which is the part that drafts and comes up with storylines, and it's the exciting part, and it's what a lot of people assume all writing is. But there's also the critic part, which is the version of you that goes in and problem solves and decides which chapters need to be cut and does all the line edits. And that's equally important, that part. But what's the most crucial thing is that you don't let them both into the same room at the same time. So you don't, while you're writing something and drafting it, don't read it over and think is this actually as good as I was hoping it was going to be? Is this scene actually working? Because that is deadly. That is where writer's block comes from, I think. It's this letting the critic into the room too early. So let your creative version draft. It's going to be a terrible first draft. They always are. But just have fun and imagine and aim big. And then once you're done with it, then you can let the critic in to go problem solve and make it better. But keep them separated. They can't be in the room at the same time.
Oh, I think that's great advice. I talk to so many writers and they always say it's 1 part writing, 5 parts editing, but I think that's great advice to kind of keep that separate like that. Well, Eliot Schrefer, thank you so much for spending time here in the Left of Str8 show. Again, the book right here. Be sure to check it out. Amazing, The Brightness Between Us. Congratulations, my friend. Where can they find you? And you have a great website. Let everyone know where your website address is and follow you on social media.
Yeah. So it's EliotSchrefer.com. And I'm on social media. My handles are all either Eliot Schrefer or Schrefer, but it's no one else except for my immediate family members has the last name Schrefer. So you're not going to go wrong in following someone named Schrefer. It's going to be me. So, but thanks. And the books are available in your local independent bookstore and also the big chains. So it's available now.
There you go. Support those independent bookstores, everyone. Eliot, stay on the line for me. Fantastic. I appreciate having you on. Guys, we're going to have little 5 questions with Eliot next week, so be sure to look for that. We appreciate you tuning in every week here at the Left of Str8 Show interviews. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Left of Str8 Show. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast distributor, and please give us a 5-star rating so more listeners can find us. You can follow us on social media, and be sure to check out our website for contests and other news and information. See you next week.